So what is childhood trauma? Let's take a look. Childhood trauma comes from stressful or traumatic experiences that happen during childhood. The experience itself isn't the trauma comes from those experiences. Trauma in both childhood and adulthood is the response to frightening, distressing, or life-impacting events. When traumatic events happen during childhood, so pre-birth right up to the age of 18, the trauma response or impact is called childhood trauma. It doesn't matter at what age the trauma happens. If it happens during childhood, it's childhood trauma. So what is trauma? We can often think of trauma as resulting from long-term or intense adverse events that happen during childhood. Things like abuse, neglect, war, or natural disasters. Trauma can actually happen from any event that is frightening, distressing, or life-impacting. The child doesn't even have to be subject to the event. They can just be exposed to it and still experience trauma. An example of this could be something like a car accident a child witnesses. They're not part of the accident itself, but could have a traumatic response from witnessing the accident. There are also many different types of trauma that can impact a child in different ways. Acute, chronic, and complex trauma refers to trauma that results from events that happen at different frequencies. Developmental trauma refers to trauma that also impacts on a child's development. And generational trauma refers to trauma that repeats itself across generations. Children can also be impacted by one type of trauma or more than one type of trauma, all at the same time. So what about trauma and adverse childhood experiences? Are they linked? Childhood trauma and adverse childhood experiences are linked, as childhood trauma often results from the adverse childhood experience. Trauma can result from any adverse childhood experience, but commonly results from experiences such as domestic violence, neglect, abuse, or family separation. A really important thing to remember is that trauma and its impact is unique to the individual, so unique to the individual child. Two children can experience the same traumatic events and can be impacted differently by those events. This includes siblings growing up in the same household who experience the same circumstances. So what is trauma impact? So trauma impact when it comes to childhood trauma is a really in-depth topic because there's so many different types of trauma impact. Trauma can impact childhood behaviour, emotional well-being, sensory skills, motor skills, cognitive abilities, even toileting skills, as well as the actual trauma response itself. The list of things that can be impacted by childhood trauma is vast. However, this doesn't mean that that impact will happen. Every child, situation, and trauma experience is unique, and the trauma impact is therefore unique as well. In its simplest form, childhood trauma is the trauma impact from any distressing, frightening, or life-changing events that happen during childhood. Childhood trauma is, however, complex. There are many different types of childhood trauma and many different factors that can influence its impact. It's also really important to remember that trauma impact is unique to the individual child. Two children can experience the exact same thing, and the trauma impact can be completely different for those two children. Here's one final trauma-informed care top tip. We've got loads of videos on our YouTube channel on trauma-informed care and childhood trauma. If you're supporting a child who's experienced trauma and you find these videos helpful, share them with others who are also supporting the same child. That can help us use a really joined-up approach where everybody has the same understanding when supporting our children. To find out more, subscribe to Tribe for trauma-informed care in practice.